Loki is one of the most fascinating characters in the Marvel Universe. Unlike traditional villains, he isn't merely driven by ambition or pure evil. His complexity makes him unpredictable. One moment he's a mortal enemy, the next, someone we can sympathize with. Perhaps it's precisely this duality that makes so many viewers identify with him. But the question remains, why are we drawn to a character who lies, manipulates, and creates chaos around him? What is it about Loki that awakens empathy and even admiration in us, even when he seems to act against everything and everyone? In this video, we'll dive into Loki's unconscious, exploring how his story blends Norse mythology, pop culture, and psychology. The idea is to reveal what lies behind his trickster mask and understand how he represents something very present within each of us. If you enjoy this type of content, go ahead and hit that like button, and let's discover that when we look at Loki, we're not just observing a god of mischief, but also facing reflections of our own internal conflicts. After all, is there a little bit of Loki inside you? In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Loki is presented as the adoptive son of Odin, king of Asgard, and brother to Thor. From the beginning, his identity already carries a contradiction. He wasn't born an Asgardian prince, but rather is descended from the frost giants, historical enemies of the realm. This revelation not only shakes his relationship with his family, but also awakens in him a feeling of rejection and inferiority that will mark his entire trajectory. His personality is built upon this ambiguity. Loki doesn't fit the classic definition of a hero, but he also cannot be reduced to just a villain. He oscillates between these two poles, transitioning between moments of cruelty and vulnerability. This in-between space makes him an unpredictable character, as we never truly know what his next action will be or which side of his essence he will follow. In the early films, we see Loki assume the posture of a declared antagonist. In Thor 2011, he manipulates events to seize Asgard's throne. In The Avengers 2012, he takes his ambition even further by attempting to dominate Earth with the help of Thanos' army. In these moments, he is the trickster in his most destructive form. Intelligent, manipulative, and capable of deceiving even those closest to him. On the other hand, the Loki series shows a new dimension of the character. There, instead of just being a villain, he appears in direct confrontation with his own contradictions. The journey through different timelines forces him to encounter alternative versions of himself, each carrying different choices and destinies. It's as if Marvel had created a visual metaphor to represent Loki's divided mind and his struggle for identity. This transformation arc is what makes his trajectory so rich. Loki evolves from a threatening villain to a more human figure who seeks self-knowledge and tries to understand his role in the universe. Marvel doesn't reduce him to a simple antagonist, but places him in a process of individuation, a psychological journey that deeply dialogues with concepts from Jungian psychology. Thus, Loki in the MCU reveals himself to be much more than an entertainment character. He's a modern representation of universal dilemmas: the search for acceptance, the fight against rejection, the temptation of power, and the need to discover who we really are. It's precisely this depth that makes him one of Marvel's most complex and, at the same time, most captivating characters. In Norse mythology, Loki is one of the most intriguing and controversial figures. Unlike what Marvel presents, he is not Thor's brother nor Odin's son, but a god associated with fire, trickery, and metamorphosis. His origin already places him in a position of prominence. He is not a declared enemy of the gods, but he's also not completely allied with them. This ambiguity is reflected in his actions, sometimes helping, sometimes hindering the other gods. Loki is known as the master of transformation. He can take on different forms and identities, from animals to human appearances, always using this ability to deceive or escape situations. This characteristic reinforces his role as an unpredictable being, capable of altering the course of events in unexpected ways. His power lies not only in strength, but in intelligence and cunning. Despite his tricks, Loki also played important roles in mythology. Often he found creative solutions to apparently unsolvable problems, although in other situations, he was responsible for creating chaos himself. This duality makes him an essential character for the balance of stories, as he symbolizes both threat and the possibility of renewal. An important point is that in mythology, Loki doesn't possess the same emotional trajectory explored by Marvel. While in comics and films he carries feelings of rejection and a search for identity, in Norse tradition he is more an agent of chaos and change, without a narrative of self-discovery. This shows how the modern adaptation created additional layers to bring him closer to human psychology. Still, some similarities remain between the two versions. Both in myth and pop culture, Loki is portrayed as intelligent, sarcastic, and manipulative. He represents the unpredictable, what can both destroy and pave the way for transformations. This essence is what connects the mythological Loki to Marvel's Loki. Both personify the creative chaos that challenges rules and changes destinies. In Jungian psychology, archetypes represent universal forms of behavior and imagination that inhabit humanity's collective unconscious. Among them, the Trickster Archetype occupies a special place for being a paradoxical figure. It is neither merely destructive nor merely creative, but a force that mixes chaos and renewal. The Trickster challenges social norms, breaks established rules, and through his unpredictable actions, destabilizes rigid orders. His essence lies not in obedience, but in transgression, which frequently reveals hidden truths and opens new possibilities for transformation. The Trickster differs from other archetypes because it doesn't fit into fixed molds. He is not a hero because he doesn't seek to save or follow elevated ideals, but he's also not a villain because his actions don't have destruction as their sole objective. He transits on the border between these two extremes, acting in the gray, zones of morality. This liminal movement makes him fascinating, as it highlights the contradictory side of human nature itself. Instead of offering certainties, the Trickster confronts us with our ambiguities, showing that order and disorder are part of the same reality. Various cultures around the world possess versions of the Trickster, demonstrating the universal force of this archetype. In Greek mythology, Hermes is known as the god of travelers and messenger of the gods, but also patron of thieves, famous for his tricks and skills at deception. Among indigenous peoples of North America, Coyote is a central figure, both creator of disorder and bearer of valuable teachings. In African tradition, the Orisha Exu is revered as guardian of paths and master of communication, while also being feared for his cunning in playing tricks and inverting expectations. The common point among these manifestations is that all portray the Trickster as a liminal figure situated on the margins between worlds or categories. He circulates between gods and humans, between order and chaos, between truth and lies. This border position grants him power because it makes him free from bonds, but also dangerous because his actions cannot be predicted or controlled. By destabilizing certainties, the Trickster forces communities and individuals to rethink values and reconstruct meanings. He doesn't destroy just to destroy, but to make space for something new. From a psychological perspective, this archetype fulfills a fundamental transformative function. It acts as a force that questions crystallized patterns and breaks mental structures that no longer serve the individual's growth. Often, its action is painful because it exposes illusions, reveals hypocrisies, and confronts the internal shadows. We prefer to hide. However, it's precisely in this confrontation that the possibility for change lies. The Trickster symbolizes creative chaos, an energy that, by disrupting the known, opens the path for constructing the new. Carl Gustav Jung saw in the Trickster the living representation of collective and individual shadow. He embodies repressed aspects, impulses, and desires that society considers unacceptable, but that remain active in our unconscious. When it manifests, the Trickster forces us to look at these denied parts of ourselves. This encounter can be destructive if there's no consciousness, but it can also be liberating if used as a tool for self-knowledge. The Trickster, in this sense, is a bridge to individuation, the psychological process of integration between conscious and unconscious. It's important to note that the Trickster is not just a symbolic figure, but also a living experience in the human psyche. He appears when we sabotage ourselves, when we try shortcuts, when we question authorities, or when we use humor to diffuse tense situations. This energy can both lead us to impulsive and self-destructive choices and inspire us to be creative and find unconventional solutions. Ambivalence is in his nature. He cannot be totally contained, only recognized and consciously integrated into our lives. Therefore, the trickster archetype is so relevant when analyzing pop culture characters like Marvel's Loki. He is the modern personification of this ancestral force, manipulative, intelligent, chaotic, but also transformative. By embodying this archetype, Loki is not just a charismatic villain, but a psychological mirror that reflects our own contradictory impulses. He shows that within each of us exists an inner trickster that can both sabotage us and propel us to grow. This is the symbolic force that keeps the trickster alive and current in contemporary narratives. In the Marvel Universe, Loki is more than a villain or anti-hero. He functions as a mirror of the internal conflicts we all carry. Since his first appearance, we see in him the struggle for recognition, envy toward his brother Thor, and the pain of rejection due to his different origin. These human feelings, placed in a character with extraordinary powers and intelligence, make Loki a powerful metaphor for universal psychological dilemmas. The trickster archetype appears in Loki through his manipulative behavior and constant need to deceive. But instead of seeing this only as malice, we can interpret his tricks as defense mechanisms. Lies, irony, and humor are ways Loki uses to mask his fragility and hide his fear of not being accepted. He tricks not only others, but mainly himself, fleeing from direct confrontation with his own wounds. Within analytical psychology, we can say that Loki embodies the struggle between shadow and individuation. His shadow appears in destructive impulses, in anger, and in the will to power that leads him to commit atrocities. But at the same time, in his trajectory, we see glimpses of individuation, the desire to discover who he really is, separate from the expectations of his father, brother, or any authority. This tension between self-destruction and self-discovery makes him a rich and deeply human character. The Loki series on Disney Plus is perhaps the best example of this psychological struggle, when he is torn from his timeline and placed before different versions of himself. What we see is a symbolic representation of the unconscious. Each Loki variant is a part of his psyche, a more naive side, another more aggressive, another more ambitious. This multiplicity shows that the unconscious is not unitary, but formed by different internal voices that compete for space in our identity. This journey between timelines can be understood as a dive into one's own unconscious. When confronting his alternative versions, Loki must deal with choices that could have been his, with mistakes he could have made, and even with possibilities of redemption. It's as if the character were forced to recognize that there isn't just one version of himself, but various possibilities of being, and that assuming this complexity is an essential part of self-knowledge. Thus, Loki's unconscious is not just a narrative metaphor, but a profound psychological portrait. He reminds us that we all carry within us multiple versions, contradictory desires, and poorly resolved wounds. What makes his journey interesting is precisely the confrontation with these shadowy parts, not to destroy them, but to integrate them. And it's in this process that Loki stops being just a villain to become a figure that speaks directly to our own human condition. The trickster archetype in Loki possesses a luminous side that cannot be ignored. His intelligence and creativity allow him to see solutions where no one else sees exits. He doesn't limit himself to what is imposed, questions orders, opens gaps in what seemed closed, and creates new paths. This posture makes him an agent of change, even if the price is the discomfort he causes in others. It's precisely this capacity to break structures that brings him closer to creative chaos. Another positive aspect is his ability to see beyond Asgard's rigid order and even the Avengers' structure. Loki understands that no institution is perfect, and that every hierarchy carries fragilities. By challenging this order, he provokes necessary reflections. To what extent is blind obedience healthy? To what extent does the system need to be shaken to evolve? His role, in this sense, is of someone who shakes the comfort zone. Loki also demonstrates a profound capacity for adaptation. While other characters follow predictable paths, he changes direction quickly, whether to survive or to transform the reality around him. This flexibility is an essential psychological quality because it allows dealing with complex situations without becoming paralyzed. The trickster in him manifests as resilience and inventiveness. internal resources we can all learn to cultivate. However, the shadow side of the trickster also manifests strongly in Loki. His inclination toward manipulation distances him from people who could genuinely love and support him. Lying becomes a habit, and like any defense mechanism used excessively, it ends up corroding bonds and generating distrust. Thus, what initially protects him transforms into a trap, creating a cycle of isolation and pain. Self-sabotage is another striking trait in Loki. Even when he's about to achieve something important, he often destroys his own chance out of fear of not being worthy. This psychological characteristic is common in those who carry wounds of rejection and insecurity. By sabotaging his own success, Loki reinforces the belief that he doesn't deserve recognition, perpetuating suffering. It's a destructive dynamic, but extremely human. The desire for power also leads him down dark paths. Seeking to fill the void of his wounded identity, he tries to control others, dominate territories, and place himself above everyone. This impulse, deep down, springs from his vulnerability, from not feeling sufficient as he is, but the search for absolute power instead of healing only amplifies his loneliness. Here, the trickster becomes destructive as he transforms pain into tyranny. The irony is that despite so many falls, Loki never loses his humanity. The trickster in him is not just a destroyer, but also a revealer. His failures expose universal fragilities, the need for approval, the fear of rejection, the struggle to be recognized as someone unique. By showing his falls, Loki allows the audience to see themselves reflected in his imperfections. Thus, the archetype becomes a tool for identification and empathy. From a psychological perspective, the trickster in Loki functions as a mirror of human contradictions. He shows that we are not made only of virtues, but also of lies, insecurities, and repressed desires. This dimension is essential for individuation. We can only grow when we face our shadows. Loki, by embodying the trickster, symbolizes this painful but necessary confrontation of those who dare to look within themselves. Curiously, the positive and negative aspects of the trickster in Loki don't cancel each other out, but coexist. His intelligence mixes with manipulation, his creativity with self-sabotage, his desire for recognition with the search for power. This contradictory fusion is what makes the characters so human and close to us. After all, we all carry to a lesser or greater degree the same mixture of forces that can elevate or destroy us. Finally, the trickster in Loki reminds us that no transformation happens without chaos. His tricks and mistakes are not just obstacles, but also engines of change. By questioning, deceiving, and even destroying, he opens space for new meanings to emerge. This is the trickster's paradox. At the same time he threatens order, he prepares the ground for evolution. Loki, with all his flaws and brilliance, symbolizes this psychological truth in an intense and captivating way. The identification with Loki happens because he clearly shows that we are not made only of virtues and correct behaviors. His personality contains feelings that we all experience at some point: envy, jealousy, loneliness, and the desperate search for recognition. What makes the difference is that by seeing these emotions in a powerful character with extraordinary abilities, we can see our own vulnerabilities reflected in an amplified way. Loki doesn't disguise his flaws, he lives them intensely, and this brings us closer to him. Another reason for identification is that Loki represents the inner trickster that exists within each of us. This part of the psyche sometimes wants shortcuts, tries to cheat the system, invents excuses, or manipulates situations to gain advantages. When we see Loki doing this on screen, we feel a mix of fascination and discomfort, because we recognize these behaviors in ourselves. It's as if he externalized something we prefer to hide, making visible what we carry silently. Loki's pain is also a central point of connection. He wasn't born in Asgard, doesn't fully belong to the world where he was raised, and therefore always feels displaced. This feeling of not belonging is universal. Everyone has felt like an outsider, rejected, or different at some point. Seeing Loki dealing with this emptiness makes us revisit our own experiences of exclusion, creating a powerful emotional bond. The audience sees their own scars in him. Furthermore, Loki exposes the human side of the struggle between acceptance and power. Often, when we don't feel loved for who we are, we seek to be admired for what we achieve. Loki follows this path by trying to compensate for lack of love with domination and control. This logic, though destructive, isn't far from human reality. How many times do people seek status, success, or recognition as a way to cover emotional wounds? In this aspect, he translates our defense strategies on a mythic scale. Another important point is that Loki is a deeply ambiguous character. He is neither merely cruel nor merely vulnerable, but an unpredictable mixture of these two dimensions. This complexity makes him realistic because human beings are also contradictory. Unlike perfect heroes whom we can hardly mirror in ourselves, Loki allows us to accept that we fail, that we contradict ourselves, and that we often don't know exactly who we are. He embodies this ambiguity authentically. Loki's humor also contributes to identification. Even in tense situations, he uses irony as defense and as a way to stand out. This trait reflects very common behavior, using laughter or wit to disguise pain. Many people resort to sarcasm as a protection mechanism, and seeing Loki do this awakens empathy. The audience perceives that behind the joke lies deep sadness, and this humanizes him even more. Another aspect is that Loki reveals the creative side of the trickster. His intelligence and ability to find unexpected solutions resonate in us because we all have moments when we need to improvise or use cunning to face difficult situations. He shows that creativity can be born from crisis, and that the ability to subvert rules can be a survival tool. Thus, even his chaotic attitudes awaken silent admiration. Loki also attracts us because he shows that internal shadows don't need to be hidden. They can be faced and transformed. Throughout his trajectory, especially in the series, he is confronted by different versions of himself and gradually must accept that he cannot eternally flee from who he is. This journey reflects the individuation process described by Jung, where human beings need to integrate light and shadow to become whole. We see in Loki the hope that even our contradictions can become a path to growth. The creator-destroyer duality in Loki is another reflection of our psyche. We all have potential to build good things, but also to self-sabotage. This thin line between evolution and destruction is a constant human dilemma. Loki, while threatening entire worlds, also opens doors to profound transformations. His journey reminds us that opposing forces coexist within us, and that life is precisely the exercise of balancing these polarities. Finally, we identify with Loki because he shows that even chaos has meaning. His mistakes, manipulations, and even his falls function as catalysts for change. The audience connects because they understand intuitively that without facing our contradictions, there is no evolution. Loki translates this process into narrative, mixing pain, humor, shadow, and creativity. When asking, why do we like him so much? Often the answer might be simple, because Loki is a raw reflection of ourselves, imperfect, complex, and searching for a place in the world. Loki is a character who defies simple classifications. He is not a classic hero, but he also cannot be reduced to a villain. His moral ambiguity is one of the most fascinating elements because it mirrors our own complexity. Like him, human beings transit between ethical choices and selfish attitudes, between moments of compassion and others of cruelty. This duality makes the audience see themselves in his actions, recognizing that no one is totally good or totally bad. The character reveals how our intentions don't always align with our acts. Loki often desires to be accepted and loved, but his strategies to achieve this distance him even further from people. This contrast shows the difficulty we all have in dealing with our own emotions and expressing them healthily. The result is a deep identification as we see in him the frustration of wanting something legitimate while simultaneously sabotaging it through our choices. From a psychological perspective, Loki's ambiguity can be understood as the struggle between the conscious self and unconscious forces. The trickster within him symbolizes repressed impulses, desires for power, and unresolved needs. This internal battle reminds us that morality is not a straight line, but a field of tensions, where decisions are shaped by pain and insecurities. Loki therefore translates the human condition in all its imperfection. Additionally, Loki's narrative questions our need to label people. We want to divide characters and individuals into heroes or villains, but Loki insists on escaping these categories. This generates discomfort because it forces us to admit that real people also carry this mixture of light and shadow. The character, by moving in this gray space, invites us to rethink our judgments and accept that ambiguity is an inevitable part of life. Finally, Loki shows us that moral ambiguity can be creative and transformative. His unpredictability, though dangerous, also opens space for change and reinvention. He is capable of failing, learning, and rewriting his path, something we all do to a greater or lesser degree. It's at this point that his journey finds echo in us. We are not static, but beings in constant oscillation between mistakes and successes, chaos and order, destruction and creation. Throughout his entire trajectory, Loki shows that he is more than a Marvel character. He is the modern update of an ancestral archetype. The trickster, present in various cultures, appears in Loki's figure to remind us that our contradictions and internal conflicts never cease to exist. This is the reason why he remains so current and relevant to today's narratives. In the MCU, Loki translates in an accessible and engaging way the creative chaos that dwells within us. He represents both the destructive impulse and the creative force, the lie that imprisons and the truth that liberates. This duality is what makes the audience feel connected, as it reflects dilemmas we all face daily in our own lives. The deepest message Loki leaves us is that transformation only happens when we face our own internal chaos. Instead of denying our shadows, we need to recognize them and learn to deal with them. This is exactly what his journey suggests. Without confrontation with pain, envy, rejection, and loneliness, there is no space for psychological evolution. Therefore, the final question is not merely rhetorical, but an invitation to personal reflection. Which part of Loki lives in you? The one that sabotages, lies, and creates illusions? Or the one that, despite the chaos, opens paths to new possibilities? The answer may not be simple, but it's precisely this ambiguity that makes Loki so human and so close to us.